Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
They always say holidays are about family, but that's only true if your family actually wants you around. This year, like every year before, I had told myself not to expect too much, keep the bar low, and maybe I wouldn't be disappointed. But still, I found myself standing in front of my closet on Christmas Eve, holding up the one blazer I owned that didn't look like it came from a clearance bin. It still had the faintest trace of cologne from the last job interview. I wore it to over 2 years ago now. I dusted it off, laughed a little, and checked my phone for the address Brent had sent for the dinner. That's when I saw the message. Hey man, Mom thinks maybe it's better if this year is just close family. It's been a long year. No offense or anything. Hope you understand. No offense? That's the kind of thing people say right before they punch you in the gut and smile like they didn't mean it. I sat down on the edge of my bed and just stared at the screen. Close family. As if I hadn't grown up in that same goddamn house, eating soggy casseroles off the same chipped Christmas plates, listening to Mom scold us for breathing too loud during the King's speech. I was close family. Just not close enough, apparently. I didn't respond. What was I gonna say? Merry Christmas. Thanks for the reminder that I'm not good enough for you? Nah. I tossed the phone on the bed and walked into the kitchen, half laughing at how quiet the apartment was. My place was small, tiny, actually. 2 rooms if you counted the bathroom, 3 if you lied. No decorations, no lights, no tree. I hadn't even bought groceries for the day because I figured I'd be eating over at Brent's, like we always did. I poured myself a glass of water, then changed my mind and reached for the dusty bottle of wine sitting on top of the fridge. I'd been saving it for when my app got acquired, but hell, at this point, what was I really saving it for? I popped it open and sat down at my tiny kitchen table, the one I bought used off Craigslist 5 years ago when I moved into this place thinking it'd be temporary. It wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel small by them. Growing up, Brent was always the big shot. He was the varsity everything, the straight-A golden boy with the square jaw and the perfect smile. I was the quiet one who liked computers and never got the girl. My mother used to joke that I could rewire the toaster but couldn't toast a piece of bread in the real world. She said it with a laugh, but there was always a little bite in it. Karen, Brent's wife, never even pretended. I remember one Christmas a few years ago when she told me, in that sweet poison voice of hers, "You're such a mystery, Daniel. It's like you're always here, but not really part of anything." Well, I guess they finally decided to make it official. I stared at the message on my phone again, rereading it like maybe it would suddenly say something different. But no. Same words. Same dismissal. I guess in their world, being successful means something you can photograph. A big house, a car with leather seats, kids in private school, vacation photos in Tuscany. Not a guy who's been working from his basement for the past 6 years, building something that might crash and burn or might change his life forever. That's the thing people don't get about building something from scratch. There's no applause, no checkpoints, no safety net. Just late nights, quiet failures, and a kind of loneliness that eats at you in slow bites. But you learn to live with it. You learn to live in it. I pulled out my laptop and stared at the folder I'd saved weeks ago, the one labeled Acquisition Terms, Confidential. Most people didn't know what I'd been working on. Hell, I think even I didn't fully believe it would go through. But as of yesterday, the deal was done. Papers signed. All the tech blogs were scheduled to publish at midnight on the dot. By morning, my face was going to be on more screens than I'd ever imagined. Not that any of them knew that tonight, I was eating leftover pad thai in a 1-bedroom apartment while my family toasted themselves at some gleaming table under 2 bright lights. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt smug. But all I felt was tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with a nap, the kind that lives in your bones. The kind that builds up after years of being treated like a background character in your own story. I poured another glass and stared at the folder. I thought about calling them, telling them. rubbing it in their perfectly curated faces. But what would that even do? Make them suddenly proud? Suddenly interested? No. They didn't care about me. They cared about image. They always had. I laughed, a low, bitter thing, and toasted the quiet room. To being not close enough family, I said, and knocked the wine back like it might fill the hole they left. But it didn't. It never did. And that's when I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I turned off my phone. No more pings, no more updates, no more Merry Christmas texts from people who didn't think about me all year until the calendar told them they had to. Just silence. I opened the folder. Looked at the numbers. A part of me wanted to cry. Another part wanted to laugh until my stomach hurt, but I just sat there, fingers hovering above the keyboard, heart beating slow and heavy. Midnight was only a few hours away, and they had no idea what was coming. Not a damn clue. The morning after Christmas Eve always had a strange kind of stillness to it, like the whole world was holding its breath after gorging itself on lights, gifts, and too many drinks the night before. But this year, the silence inside my apartment didn't feel like peace. It felt like the kind of emptiness that follows a deep, invisible cut. I woke up on my old thrift store couch because I hadn't bothered dragging myself to bed. The wine bottle from last night still stood half full on the kitchen counter, beside the same untouched plate of cookies I'd baked out of tradition, not craving. I rubbed my eyes and looked out the window across the street, where some family had already started their morning, 3 kids running circles around a giant Labrador in a torn-up yard, the dad filming them with a shaky phone, the mom holding coffee in both hands like it was anchoring her to the earth. I didn't know their names, never met them, but they looked like the kind of people who would always get invited to dinner, no matter how broke they were or how often they messed up. Meanwhile, I hadn't heard my own mother's voice in over 3 months, not since I'd told her I'd sold some shares to extend runway, and she replied, "Maybe it's time to get serious about a job, honey." What she meant was, maybe it's time to stop pretending you're going to make something out of your little side project. What she meant was, get a life we can brag about to our friends. I stood there for a minute, watching the street go on without me, then walked back to my desk and opened the worn leather notebook I kept by my keyboard. Inside were 10 years' worth of names, lines of code, passwords I'd memorized like prayers, and at the back, a list I called the list they never asked about. It wasn't just a list of tasks or features. It was everything I had built without applause, without feedback, without so much as a goddamn "how's it going?" from the people who were supposed to care. They had never asked me how many nights I'd stayed up rewriting backend logic because my server crashed at 3 in the morning. They never asked about the nights I bled into the keyboard when I lost my first seed investor 3 days before rent was due. They didn't know how many rejections I'd gotten from venture capitalists who thought I lacked vision, or how many times I'd eaten instant noodles for a week straight to keep AWS paid. Have you ever felt like the people closest to you only cheer for you when you're already winning? If this happened to you, what would you do? Call them out or go silent? Because that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? You're either the kind of person who drags the past into the room like a chain, or you're the kind who locks the door behind you and walks away without a word. I used to think I could be the second kind. I'm not sure anymore. I flipped to the final page of the notebook, where I'd written one thing, just one line, circled in red ink over and over. December 25th. 2024, they'll know. That was the day I'd set in my mind like a finish line. The date the press embargo would lift. The day the world would know what I'd been building. The day the people who forgot me would suddenly remember my name. I opened my laptop, cleared the notifications, and pulled up the email from Andrea, a partner at Falcon Ridge Capital, the ones who'd acquired my platform in one of the quietest deals of the year. It had all been kept under wraps, NDA tight and leak-proof, just like I'd asked. I wanted it that way. I didn't want the attention early, didn't want the vultures or the fake congratulations from people who never saw me grinding in the dark. Her subject line read, "Final confirmation. Green light for midnight." I didn't even open it at first. I just sat there staring at the screen, heart thumping too loud in a room that hadn't heard real laughter in months. I wasn't sure if it was fear or relief or something worse, that dull ache you feel when the dream comes true, but you're too used to losing to know what to do with it. Most people think that success is like flipping a switch. One moment you're nobody and the next you're famous, rich, respected. But what they don't tell you is that it comes wearing quiet shoes. It doesn't kick the door in. It knocks once, politely. It gives you the choice to open it or keep pretending it's not real. I clicked it open. One sentence inside. We're clear, stories will go live on the hour, NDA ends at midnight PST. That was it. No fanfare. No champagne. Just a timestamp. I looked at the clock. Less than 16 hours to go. 16 hours until every outlet from TechCrunch to Bloomberg would be publishing stories about the stealth tech company acquired for over $2.8 billion. 16 hours until they'd put a name and a face to the founder who had refused interviews, photos, or even a LinkedIn profile. And I didn't even know what I was going to do with that moment when it arrived. Would I tell them? Send one clean, sharp text with a link and no words? Would I ignore them completely, let them stew in the silence and wonder how they missed the biggest thing I ever did right in front of them? Or would I cave, answer the phone when mom calls, nod along as Brent pretends he always believed in me, smile when Karen says she always knew you had it in you? I don't know. But what I do know is that somewhere between failure and fortune, there's a place where the people who once pitied you come crawling back like they never left. I know that's where I'm heading. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to see them there. There's a strange kind of silence that lives in the seconds before something big happens, like the whole world is on pause and the air itself is holding back a breath it doesn't want to exhale. I sat in that kind of silence, alone in my apartment, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen like it was a countdown clock to a life I wasn't sure I belonged in anymore. The wine was gone, the cookies were still untouched, and the only light in the room came from the blue glow of the screen as the minutes inched toward midnight. At 11:59, I stood up and walked to the window, watching the street below. Most of the houses were dark, with only a few porch lights left on for no one in particular. Somewhere in the distance, someone lit a sparkler and laughed too loud. It was probably some drunk teenager pretending it was New Year's already. Good for them. At least they had something to laugh about. When the clock on my laptop hit 12:01, I didn't feel the earth shake or hear any triumphant music playing in the background. There was no confetti, no cheering, no sudden wave of relief. There was just a single notification, one quiet ping, that confirmed what I already knew was coming. CNBC ran with the headline first. Stealth tech founder behind groundbreaking AI acquisition revealed. Who is Daniel Mercer? Then came Bloomberg, the billionaire you've never heard of until now. Then TechCrunch, The Verge, Forbes, all of them dropping the same story within seconds of each other, like they'd been waiting all week to push the button. The NDA had lifted, and suddenly, every outlet that had ever ignored my emails now wanted to tell the world they discovered me. I sat back down and opened a few of the links, scrolling through photos of the app's interface, mock-ups of the new AI engine, and quotes I had never given but were somehow attributed to me. They were already calling me the quiet architect of the next tech wave, a genius recluse who had revolutionized automated language synthesis and high-efficiency neural task processing. I read the words, but they didn't feel like mine. They were wearing my name, but the shoes were too shiny, the smile too big. Then the phone started buzzing. First it was unknown numbers. Media people? Old investors who had ghosted me years ago now calling like we were long-lost cousins. Then the names started appearing, people I hadn't heard from in years. A guy I went to college with who once told me I was wasting my time on nerd stuff. A girl I dated for 3 months who broke up with me because I lacked ambition. Even my old manager from the call center job I held during the early startup years texted me to say how proud he was and that he always knew you had that spark. It was like my name had been passed around on some invisible list titled, People You Should Suck Up to Now. And they were all taking turns dialing in. But I didn't answer. Not a single one. The phone buzzed and blinked and jumped on the kitchen counter like a live thing, begging for attention, for validation, for something I wasn't ready to give. I stared at it, took another sip of water, and let it keep ringing. It wasn't that I didn't feel anything. I felt everything, all at once. The weight of 10 years of being dismissed. The ache of nights where I ate dry cereal in silence while my code crashed for the 4th time that day. The sharp memory of that Christmas dinner I'd sat through 3 years ago where Karen had joked, loudly, that I was Daniel.com because that's all his ideas ever become. .com and gone. And now here I was, $3 billion deep into the future, and not one person in that room back then had ever asked what I was building. Until now. The text messages kept pouring in blue bubbles, green bubbles, long paragraphs, and awkwardly short ones. Some were fake humble brags, others were half-hearted apologies. One guy even wrote, "I knew you'd make it, man. Can you invest in my crypto project?" I laughed so hard at that one I nearly dropped the phone. But then it happened. A new message popped up. The name at the top wasn't some investor or journalist or thirsty ex-friend trying to ride the wave. It was my mom. Just one sentence. "We saw the news. Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. The kind of long that makes you forget to blink. Because as much as I'd wanted this moment to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, what I hadn't prepared for was how hollow it would feel when it finally came. That message wasn't about me. Not really. It was about the version of me they could now brag about. The version whose face was on websites they actually read. The version that fit into their holiday photos, finally worthy of a seat at the table I had been pushed away from 24 hours earlier. But the thing is, they weren't texting the me who sat in the small, quiet apartment surrounded by second-hand furniture and dusty notebooks. They were texting the myth. The headline. The success story with a price tag attached. And I didn't know if I could answer that kind of message. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I locked the phone, turned off the screen, and leaned back in my chair. It was done. The world knew. And they had no idea what it had cost. Long before I ever wrote a line of code, before I ever understood what an algorithm was or how electricity danced inside circuits, I understood one thing with perfect clarity. There are rooms you're welcome in, and there are rooms where your presence is tolerated like a draft from a cracked window. And in my house, growing up, Christmas was the grand performance of which side of the room you belonged to. It wasn't always about who was loved, not exactly, but about who could shine bright enough to earn it out loud. Brent could always shine. From the moment he was born, he came out with a full head of hair and a pair of lungs that could announce his existence across state lines. My mom used to tell people that even as a baby, he was magnetic, and she'd laugh like it was the most charming curse a mother could carry. Brent played football by 10, had a Letterman jacket by 15, and won a full ride to business school by 18. Every trophy he brought home was a new ornament for my parents to hang their pride on. Meanwhile, I built things. I didn't yell, didn't run, didn't win. I just sat with quiet hands and busy thoughts, taking apart radios and VCRs, and eventually, when Dad brought home that old IBM from the office, I discovered I could talk to something without it laughing, interrupting, or calling me weird. My parents didn't hate that about me. They just didn't know what to do with it. I think they were afraid of what they couldn't explain at dinner parties. I still remember one Christmas, I must have been 9 or 10, when I made a little digital advent calendar on Dad's computer. It was nothing fancy, just some rudimentary HTML, a few static images, a button to reveal each day. I stayed up until 2 in the morning for 2 straight weeks working on it, watching tutorials I barely understood, typing code like it was a secret language only I could read. I printed out instructions and even wrote everyone's names into the page, so when you clicked the 25th, it said, "Merry Christmas, Mercer family," with all our photos in pixelated glory. They opened it, glanced at it, smiled politely, and then went back to watching Brent's video from the state championship. He was 14 then, and his highlight reel had music, slow emo tackles, and one of those proud dad titles at the beginning that read number 7, The Future. My mom teared up when he scored in the final minute. No one mentioned my calendar again. It was still open on the family computer days later, ignored, quietly running in the background until someone accidentally closed the tab and never reopened it. It's strange what moments your brain decides to keep. You'd think the big, loud ones would stick, the graduations, the fights, the birthdays, but for me, it's always the quiet rejections that live the longest. The look on my mom's face when she opened Brent's scholarship letter. The way Dad shook his hand and said, "You're going to be somebody." I don't remember anyone saying that to me. Not once. That's not to say they were cruel. My parents were a lot of things: impatient, image-obsessed, terrified of mediocrity, but not cruel. They gave me a room, fed me dinner, even bought me a second-hand laptop when I was 16 after I wouldn't stop tinkering with the old desktop until it shorted out. But it was always clear, their investment in me was charity, not pride. A kindness, not a belief. Christmas dinners were the worst of it. Picture a long, polished table filled with too many candles, dishes that only got used once a year, and conversation that always seemed just a little too loud. Brent would sit at the head, telling stories about internships, girlfriends, and corporate strategy like he was already 40 and running some Fortune 500 company. Karen would laugh too hard at everything he said, while my mother would nod along like she was part of the board of directors. And me? I was usually at the far end, next to the pantry door, pretending not to mind when someone passed the stuffing without offering me any. I used to count how many words I spoke during those dinners. One year, I made it to 17. That was a personal record. The funny thing is, I didn't resent Brent. Not really. He was doing exactly what they wanted him to do, and I couldn't even fault him for it. He was good at playing the game, and he played it well. What I resented was the scoreboard, how everything we did was quietly measured, ranked, and then used to decide who deserved the bigger slice of the pie. Not the literal pie, of course. Mom always made enough dessert for everyone. But the emotional pie, the one filled with eye contact, meaningful questions, actual attention. Now, all these years later, I realize that kind of validation is a currency. And I'd been broke for most of my life. After midnight, after the news dropped and my phone wouldn't stop vibrating, I shut everything down and opened an old voice message I hadn't listened to in a long time. It was from Dad, maybe a year before he passed. He never quite knew how to talk to me, but he tried sometimes, when no one else was around to hear him fail at it. His voice crackled through the speakers, warm but uncertain. "You know, Danny, you're not flashy. Never were. But you're solid. And that'll matter someday. Maybe not to them. But it'll matter." He cleared his throat at the end, like he didn't know what else to say. And then the message ended. That was the only time I ever heard him say something that sounded like faith. And for a long time, that one line was the only seat I had at any table. By the time the sun rose the next morning, my phone had nearly overheated from the sheer volume of buzzing, dinging, and vibrating across every platform I had ever signed up for. I hadn't even had my first cup of coffee before I saw the damage. Missed calls in double digits. Voicemails stacked one on top of the other like anxious kids in line for Santa. Texts from names I hadn't seen since my 20s. Mentions from reporters and old classmates, distant cousins, and coworkers I barely remembered. And then, beneath all of it, the names that stopped me in my tracks, names I never expected to see lit up with such urgency. Brent. Karen. Mom. Not just one message. Not just a polite congrats or an emoji-laced wow. No, these were entire threads of messages. Paragraphs, apologies, overly cheerful greetings, and something that felt suspiciously like desperation wrapped in festive exclamation points. Brent's first message was simple. "Hey man, saw the news. That's incredible. Proud of you." Then came the second one, a little longer. "Would love to talk, maybe grab dinner soon?" Then a third, "Let's catch up this week. Everyone's talking about you." Karen, bless her performative little heart, didn't even pretend like we hadn't spoken in years. Her message came through at 5:30 in the morning. "Merry Christmas, Daniel. Hope we get to see you soon. We're all so proud. Brent said you've really done something amazing." As if just days ago she hadn't agreed with my mother that I was still finding myself. As if she hadn't once told me over turkey and mashed potatoes that some people just don't have that hunger, looking me dead in the eye as she said it. And my mother. Her message was quiet but unmistakable. Not the raw voice of someone grappling with regret, no. This was something softer. Calculated. I read the articles. "You've done so well. I'd love to talk when you have a moment." That phrase, "when you have a moment," hit me like an icicle through the ribs. For years, I would have given anything for that moment. A real conversation. An ounce of validation. A question about my life, not just the parts they could understand or show off to others. Now that I was valuable to the outside world, now that Forbes had named me one of the top 10 tech minds of the year, suddenly my time mattered to them. Suddenly I was family again. No, not just family, I was interesting. I didn't reply at first. I let the calls go to voicemail, watched the texts pile up, and listened to their carefully modulated voices trying to sound casual, surprised, supportive. I heard Brent fumble through his message with the kind of tone you use when you're pretending to be happy for someone who just beat you at the very game you thought you'd already won. He called me buddy, which he hadn't done since high school, and tried to joke about how I always had a thing for computer magic. Karen's voicemail was chirpy, sugary, just a touch too sweet. "We were all just blown away, Daniel. It's like, wow. The whole family's so excited. You're really something, huh?" Not a mention of the last Christmas I spent sitting quietly while she talked over me about Brent's new firm expansion. Not a word about the years they kept me out of conversations because my updates weren't exciting enough to justify a full turn. My mother's voice, though, that one stung the most. It came after I'd let 3 of her calls roll into voicemail. She didn't try to guilt me, not overtly, but there was something hollow in her tone, a kind of grasping that didn't match her usual emotional precision. "Daniel," she said, "I know this must all be overwhelming, but I'd really like to see you. We're proud. We are. Let me know when you can talk. We are proud." As if pride was a group project. As if the family that once scheduled a Christmas dinner without me could now wrap their arms around my accomplishments and wear them like shared medals. I listened to that message twice. Then I deleted it. But the thing about recognition coming too late is that it still hits something deep inside you, something soft and vulnerable that never fully hardens no matter how many times you've patched it over with cynicism. Part of me wanted to scream at them. Another part wanted to meet, to finally show them, face to face, that I hadn't needed their approval to build something world-changing. But a smaller, more dangerous part of me wanted to give them exactly what they were asking for, just not in the way they imagined. So I answered. One message. Simple. Blunt. Directed at Brent. "We can meet. Just us. No dinner. No stage. One-on-one." The reply came fast. He was too eager to even fake coolness. "Absolutely, man. Just say when and where. I'll make time." Of course he would. Because now my time had a price tag. Now my presence meant something. I was no longer the hobbyist brother who lived in a shoebox apartment tinkering with code they couldn't pronounce. I was a headline. A check with legs. A redemption arc they could insert themselves into before the credits rolled. And I was going to let him try. But only on my terms. The restaurant Brent chose was one I'd passed by 100 times but never once stepped into. The kind of place with a 3-week waitlist and valet drivers who judged you by the car you drove up in, which is probably why Brent had always liked it. I recognized it instantly from the Christmas cards, those glossy photos they sent out every year with perfectly filtered lighting. Brent at the head of a long white table, Karen raising her glass beside him, and my parents somewhere in the middle, looking like they'd bought their smiles from a catalog. They'd been coming here for years, celebrating promotions, engagements, anniversaries, birthdays, and every other excuse to feel important in a room full of mirrors and muted jazz. I'd never been invited. Not once. My name had never even come up, I'd bet, except maybe in the past tense or as a footnote to a story about how hard it is to get through to Daniel these days. When I walked in, the hostess didn't ask my name, she already knew it. I watched her face shift slightly, the way people do when they're trying to match a real person with a headline they read 24 hours ago. She escorted me to the table like she was guiding royalty, which felt absurd considering I was wearing the same navy blazer I'd worn 3 Christmases ago, the one Brent had once said made me look like a substitute teacher. Brent stood up when he saw me, arms wide, fake surprise written across every inch of his face. "Danny, my man," he said, that slick corporate tone still glued to his throat. "You look great, man. Seriously, like a whole new guy." I shook his hand and said nothing. I didn't smile. I just sat down across from him and placed my phone face down on the table, signaling the one thing I needed him to understand from the jump. This was not a reunion. This was a meeting. One he had requested, not one I needed. He ordered a whiskey. I ordered water. The waiter hovered like we were both important and delicate, like he didn't want to interrupt but also didn't want to miss anything. Brent leaned in with a grin that had too many teeth and launched straight into the show. "So," he said, fingers drumming the table, "this whole thing is just... I mean, wow. You really did it, huh? Like, full-on next level." We were all kinda stunned, honestly. In a good way. Proud. I mean, it's wild, right? 3 billion. There it was. The number? Said out loud like it was a magic word that might open a vault or erase the last 20 years of being treated like a ghost at family functions. I nodded once but didn't respond. I wanted him to sit in the space between my silence and his enthusiasm. I wanted him to feel how much that number had changed the way he looked at me. He kept going. Words spilling out like loose change, full of polished awe and performative support. He told me how he always knew I was onto something, even if he didn't quite get it back then, how Karen had actually mentioned you just the other day, how Mom and Dad would have been so impressed. I listened to all of it without blinking, letting it slide over me like water off wax. None of it mattered. Not the compliments, not the late admiration, not the cheap retrofitting of memory. Because I remembered the old words, the ones that had teeth. "You're wasting your time. It's not a real job. How long can you keep playing with this little side thing?" I remembered the times they changed the subject when I tried to talk about my work. I remembered being left off the group photo at Christmas because the frame only fits 5. I remembered being asked to not bring up the app stuff at dinner because no one gets that stuff, and it kills the mood. When the food came, I didn't touch it. Brent made a show of digging into his steak, praising the seasoning like he was on a cooking show, trying to act natural, relaxed. But the sweat above his collar betrayed him. He knew this wasn't going the way he hoped. Finally, after another 10 minutes of half-hearted nostalgia and badly disguised positioning, I put my napkin down and looked him in the eye. "You wanted to meet," I said slowly, "so here we are." He blinked, then nodded quickly. Yeah. I just thought we could talk, maybe. Reconnect." "Reconnect," I echoed. "That's what this is?" Brent paused. The confidence wavered, just a little. "I mean, I figured it's been long enough, and after everything that's happened, we should be closer. You know, closer." That word, like a bad flavor, stuck in my mouth. I leaned forward and lowered my voice. "Let me be clear," I said. "I'm not here to rehash the past. I'm not here to bond, or forgive, or play family dinner. You wanted something. Say it." He flinched, then laughed too loudly. "Come on, man. Don't be like that." "Like what?" I asked. "Like someone who remembers how I was treated?" Brent set his fork down. He finally stopped pretending. "Look," he said, "Karen's thinking about launching a small interior design studio. You know, something boutique, tasteful. And I've got this startup I'm advising, health tech, real promise. I figured maybe if you were looking to invest in the family. There it was. The ask. I nodded slowly, took a sip of my water, and let the silence sit between us until he shifted uncomfortably. I'll support you, I said at last. I'll support her. I'll even invest, if the numbers make sense. His eyes lit up with quick, desperate gratitude. But here's the deal, I continued. This doesn't buy you a narrative. You don't get to say you believed in me. You don't get to rewrite the past. You don't get to play the supportive brother in interviews or pretend we were close. I'll write the check. You keep my name out of your mouth. Brent looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. Daniel, come on, man. No, I said, standing up and pulling my card from my wallet. We're done pretending. And then I left, leaving the tab paid and the story finally mine. The holidays stretched on in that slow, aching way they always did after the main event passed. When the glitter had dulled, the wrapping paper had been shoved into black garbage bags, and people went back to their curated lives with stomachs full and egos slightly more bloated than the week before. In years past, I would have still been nursing the quiet disappointment of being an afterthought, but this time, something had shifted. The headlines were still fresh, my name still bouncing around tech circles like some kind of fluke miracle, but for me, the noise had begun to fade, like I had stepped outside of a concert and was just watching people lose their minds through the glass. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family since the dinner with Brent. The terms I laid out were met, mostly because I didn't give him the option to do otherwise. I wired him a modest investment into his health tech project after skimming the deck and laughing at how generic it all was. I made it clear there would be no photo ops, no LinkedIn announcements about how my brother believed in me before it was cool, no casual flexes in country club conversations. I wasn't trying to destroy them, not really. I just didn't owe them more than they'd earned, and that math had always been painfully simple. Still, something gnawed at me in the days after. Not guilt exactly, but a kind of unfinished business that clung to the corners of my apartment like the scent of burnt toast. I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet they had been for all those years, how easy it had been to dismiss me, how quickly they'd folded me back in once the headlines told them they should. I wasn't angry anymore. Not like before. Anger takes energy, and mine was pointed somewhere else now, toward clarity, toward peace, toward the kind of cold freedom that comes when you finally stop needing what was never really offered. That's when I sat down and wrote the letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter with ink that bled slightly on the edges of the paper because my hand was shaking more than I expected. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. I wrote, "To all of you, thank you for what you didn't give me. Thank you for the silence, the doubt, the passive remarks, and the empty chairs. You taught me something valuable, something I couldn't have learned in a room full of applause. You taught me how to build alone. How to think without needing an echo. You gave me the kind of loneliness that sharpens resolve, and I used it to carve out something solid. Something mine. I don't blame you anymore. I don't expect apologies. But I don't owe you anything beyond this truth. What I found without you, I'm keeping without you. I'm not angry. I'm just done. This isn't a check. It's peace. I hope you find yours too. Daniel." I printed 5 copies. One for my mother, one for Brent, one for Karen, and 2 addressed only as Mercer because I figured someone would hand it to my cousins or whoever else had talked about me behind tasteful wine glasses over the years. I dropped them in the mailbox and didn't include a return address. It felt good. Not triumphant, not victorious, just clean. Like closing a file you'd been dragging around for too many years. I went back inside, turned my phone off, and let the day pass without interruption. No news alerts. No notifications. No more dragging the past into the present. But the thing about letting go is that sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried. Sometimes it calls you when it's been wounded, when it realizes it might need the thing it once threw away. I turned my phone back on 2 days later. 1 voicemail. From my mother. Her voice was cracked and smaller than I remembered, like someone had taken the spine out of it. She didn't say hello, didn't comment on the letter. She just said, "Daniel." I didn't know who else to call. "Brent lost his job. It's bad. Can you call me back?" That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just the latest crisis that suddenly made me important again. Not because I was family. Because I was useful. I played the message twice, listening for something underneath the words, some sign that maybe, just maybe, it was about more than money. But there was nothing. And I sat in that silence, wondering if the peace I'd finally found could survive being pulled back into their storm. The next Christmas came around with that same quiet grip it always had, the kind that moves in slow and heavy like a fog you didn't notice until it was already pressing against the windows. Outside, the city moved with the familiar rhythm of the holiday. Cars parked in crooked lines outside apartment buildings, plastic Santas in windows, wreaths clinging to doors that probably hadn't been opened to visitors in months. The world spun its little traditions like it always did, some out of joy, some out of habit, and some just because doing something, anything, was better than sitting still and realizing how little had actually changed. Inside my apartment, everything looked almost exactly the same as it did the year before. Same threadbare couch. Same empty corner where a tree could have gone if I'd felt like decorating. Same cracked mug with coffee that had gone cold because I'd forgotten I made it. But this year, the silence wasn't hollow. This year, I hadn't been shut out. I'd chosen not to walk in. And that changed the entire shape of the room. The letter I'd sent a year ago was never acknowledged, at least not directly. No one replied. No one mentioned it. No one called to say they understood. Instead, the responses had come in different forms. Brent's stilted voicemail about his job loss, Karen's vague email weeks later talking about uncertainty and unexpected changes, my mother's strange silence that only broke when she needed something again. They never asked about the letter. They never spoke of the words I gave them freely. They only reached out when the illusion of my usefulness flickered back into their line of sight. I sat with my phone in hand, listening to the new batch of messages they'd left over the past few days. My mother's voice sounded tighter this time, not quite cold, but cautious, like she knew she was treading on ground she no longer owned. "Daniel," she said, "we're getting together tomorrow. Brent and Karen will be there. Just a small dinner. You're welcome, of course. Always welcome." I paused that one halfway through and deleted it. Another message, this time from Karen, chirped through with her usual scripted warmth. "Hi, Daniel. Just wanted to say Merry Christmas in case we don't talk. Brent said he sent you an invite. It would mean a lot to the family if you came. We've missed you. Missed me." What a fascinating word to use for someone you once made invisible. Then came Brent's voice, low and a little more grounded, maybe from actual stress or maybe just practice. "Hey, I know it's weird between us, but I meant what I said back then. I do want things to be different. You've done something real. We'd love to see you." He paused long enough for me to hear what he didn't say. "We need you." Again. Still. I stared out the window, watching the neighbor kids run in circles on the sidewalk below, chasing each other with red scarves and plastic swords like some tiny, chaotic army of joy. Their laughter climbed the walls and slipped in through the glass, a reminder that somewhere out there, people still felt things without keeping score. This year, I didn't dress up. I didn't debate whether to call back. I didn't pretend like the invitations were genuine or that they'd suddenly seen me as a person and not as a resource. Because the truth was simple and unavoidable. They only loved me when I was rich. Not just in money, though that was certainly the accelerant. They loved the version of me that could shine in a press release, the one they could reference at cocktail parties, the one who proved their bloodline still produced winners. They didn't love the boy who coded in the basement or the man who struggled for years in silence. They didn't even love the version of me who showed up quietly year after year, hoping for a scrap of curiosity. They loved the version with power. The version with clout. The version they could use. And even now, after everything, I still caught myself wondering what it would feel like to walk through that front door, sit down at their shiny table, and say nothing at all. Just sit there, let the performance roll, and measure the distance between their smiles and the truth. But I didn't go. I couldn't. Because forgiveness, in a family like mine, wasn't really forgiveness. It was currency. You offered it not because someone had earned it, but because you were afraid of what withholding it might cost you in the long run. Fame, I'd learned, was a leash dressed like a medal. You think you're free because everyone's watching, but really, they're all just waiting for you to trip so they can say they knew you would. And when it comes from the people who raised you, it cuts deeper than it should. The phone buzzed again. Another message. No name attached. Just a missed call and the blinking red light that begged for attention. I picked it up, stared at the screen, thumb hovering above the button that would play the latest pitch, the newest attempt to sound sincere, the freshest version of a recycled lie. They finally saw my face on TV. But not once did they ask if I was okay. Just, if I could help. I let the phone ring once more, then twice, then again, as the camera in my mind pulled back from the apartment, from the street, from the city, from the blinking screen in my hand that still waited for an answer. And I still hadn't decided. Because maybe peace isn't choosing between love and rejection. Maybe it's learning to live somewhere between the two. Fade to black.